Hello and welcome to the Be Formless, Flow-Driven CEO and VC podcast, where we are reshaping life, leadership, business, and investing. And today I'm welcoming to the show Marian Barber from Oklahoma, California, in the Bay Area. And it's Monday evening. Welcome to the show, Marian.
Thanks, B. How are you?
Yeah, good. How are you? Did you have a nice
Terrific.
weekend?
Had a great weekend. Beautiful, sunny, outdoors, whale watching out at the coast.
How good. Whale watching. I do love that. I love watching the whales and the dolphins as well, especially when they just jump. You're like, they're beautiful.
Yeah, and I'm in Oakland, California, not Oklahoma.
Sorry,
That's
gosh.
okay.
I almost said Oklahoma.
It is
I
the
wrote
Bay
down
Area. It is the Bay
Thank
Area. It's all
you.
good. It's all
Yeah,
good.
because Oklahoma is not in California. I cannot believe I just said that.
That's
Forgive
okay.
me. No, thank you for that. Well, it's great to have you here. I think we're going to have
Thank you.
quite the chat. We've also already had quite the chat, and this is my second time in meeting you, and I feel like we've got quite the connection. Let's get into it. You're an independent board member, advisor, and mentor, and you work within the VC, I'll say VC ecosystem in terms of, like you're working with the founders, the advisors, working with them from a funding perspective. I think I've got that right, but I'll let you explain it in more detail. And you're a deep tech growth strategist. You are spending at the moment, I think you said you're working a month, a quarter in Europe, because there is a lot happening in Europe from, climate tech, food tech, AI, lots of things you're going to share with us. And yeah, like I said, you work with deep tech, biotech, and climate-focused companies at critical growth stages, helping them move from the fragmentation to focused execution and from potential to real scale. You're one of the few operators to have guided companies from zero to IPO multiple times, and it is not an easy task. I was sharing with you, I've done a few myself, and it's as much that the word IPO is a big word, and it is a big experience. And you've done that including roles across Symantec, Amyris, Beyond Meat, and Ginkgo Bioworks. And today you bring those pattern recognition into board and advisory roles, supporting founders and leadership teams through the complexity of growth, capital, and execution. And I'll also say culture, because you made a very good point around culture and how it changes from startup and to when you go to IPO. Your work is grounded in a simple but often missed insight. Companies don't stall because of weak ideas. They stall when complexity outpaces alignment. And your focus, Marian, is on restoring the clarity across strategy, operations, culture, and capital, ensuring teams are working towards a few outcomes that actually unlock momentum. Operating at that intersection of science, business, and government, so you help those organizations scale without losing the focus, extending their runway, accelerating execution, and enabling innovation to reach market in a sustainable way. And you said to me when you booked in for the pod and I asked you what was one unique insight when it came to life, leadership, business, and investing, or how you've reshaped it, you said, I reshaped from the inside out, being a full-time employee in breakthrough businesses, and then mentioned the 4 IPOs. I'm going to hand it over to you. Tell us a bit about your journey.
Okay. So I started my journey in high tech, and I worked for Symantec and Sun Microsystems, and I was a very mediocre software person. But I was a great project manager. And so those were very large. I think Sun was 60,000 people at that time, global. Symantec all over the world. We grew through. Symantec had no original code base, grew through over 20 acquisitions with the technology teams integrating code bases. And then I had an aha light bulb moment. I went back to school, and then I shifted into biotech. And the first project I worked on, so I used to joke, and I think you and I said this, I used to joke that, is it really life and death? And the very first thing I did after I left software was we did a cure for malaria. And literally, knock on wood, everything I've done since then has been mission focused.
Yeah.
And so now I have the privilege. I worked for Amyris. We did a cure for malaria, diesel fuel, jet fuel, surfactants, and then shifted over to Beyond Meat, where we did the Beyond Burger, first plant-based burger on the shelf, and then the sausages. Moved over to Perfect Day Foods, which was using filamentous fungi for plant-based protein, raised over $400 million there. IPO'd, Symantec IPO'd, and then I went to Flagship Pioneering, which is a really interesting ecosystem out of the East Coast and how they build their businesses. Super successful model for growing through their own venture fund and connections. And then I went to Ginkgo Bioworks during COVID and helped build out the COVID testing platform, operationalizing the business. And since then, I've done, I just really took that skill set of what does it take to like, what's the right place to scale? Where do you put the effort and energy?
Yeah.
Where do you want to like process where process is helpful versus process just because you could put a lot of process in place? And that's been kind of my mantra. And then I started a few people that I had hired and worked with across the years, like the power of the network. They were all 20 somethings and now they're all 40 something. They were like, come and work for us. I need what you do. And so that's been first of all a beautiful gift because you're seeing people start a career and a life and a business. And so much of it has been impact oriented,
Yeah.
which is really amazing. I mean, people like coming up with, really novel uses of AI for molecule discovery that's solving diseases that are, it's really amazing. So now I'm not, and just to be clear, like I'm not in venture, but I work for quite a few venture funds for their portfolio companies because, and I think we were talking about this like 5 years ago, cash was cheap. And so venture funds, put a lot of money in different companies and say, yeah, do 10 things. And maybe two of them are going to hit and the other maybe not so much. And that's fine. And that's not how it is now. So there's a
No.
much tighter focus on execution, which is music to my ears because that's what I do. And so that it's been a really nice sweet spot for me. And that it gets to be in impact areas, whether it's clean tech or Femme Tech, digital health technologies for women, like
Mm.
figure. So that's been really, it's nice when everything you worked on before serves what you're doing now.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because the interconnection has been this impact from almost like get go in terms
Yeah.
of it's something that and for me, I mentioned around alignment and what you do, and it's almost like you bring all the disconnected pieces, and if you truly want to scale, you have to bring it all together. We were talking pre-show. You can't just expect to go to market and have a really disconnected internal system, if you like. And so if it starts from the inside with an impact and a purpose and a mission versus
That's the best founder. That's the best founder. A founder that says, I saw or experienced this problem, and here's a problem I want to try to solve.
yeah.
Because it can't just be someone that says, I want to be a founder because I want to be a founder. That's a very different experience of the business. Yeah.
What do you say to those? So you must have come across of some of those founders in the past where they say, I want to be a founder. Like, what's your advice to them when they say that to you without because of what you just mentioned, I see as lived experience in terms of,
Yeah.
when you can't, like you've got the problem or you've experienced it or encountered it and you're like, it's not solved. And then you're on this mission to solve it for the rest of your life. It becomes like for me a lifelong mission, the impact you want to make.
Well, it's like having a kid, right? So it's a commitment. And I'm in the Bay Area, right? So there's most. I don't like when people say most, but many kids grow up here thinking that they have to have a startup. And I always say to people, "Ain't no shame working for the man. Like you could have a amazing, impactful life and career working for all kinds of companies." And so typically, when I meet a founder who just wants to do a startup, I always say like, "What's the problem you're trying to solve?" And I saw right on, I live right by the UC Berkeley campus, and I saw one of the Notion founders last week, and he said he was at Stanford. He said every semester I tried to do a startup, and none of them went anywhere until my final semester. And I said, "Here's a problem I want to try to solve." And then he started Notion with three other founders, and Notion has gone on to be a very successful company. But it wasn't until he said, "Here's a problem I want to solve. Here's something I feel strongly about." So usually, I'll say to people, you can ask. There's all kinds of questions you could ask. I mean, they're gonna have their some Sam, Tam, but it's really, if you don't, because it's a huge lift. It's epic to do a startup and to raise money, and so you gotta truly have the emotional commitment to doing it. So
Yeah,
it's
because a lot of people say to me, "You've chosen the hard road, B," and I'm like, "Well, it is a hard road, but I wouldn't do it any differently." Like in terms of there's nothing wrong, like you say, working for the man, there's also nothing wrong with choosing the harder road. It depends on what like back to what your mission or your impact is. You also talked about the GDD, and I'm sure you apply that to, a lot of founders that you work with in terms of good, difficult, different. Can you share a little bit about that too, please?
That's one of my favorite models, and it's a great weekly exercise, quarterly exercise. I use it with boards too. I think it's really effective where you're saying good, difficult, different. So, what did we do good? What went well? What do we want to shout ourselves out for? People can just go up and write on giant post it notes. And then difficult, like what was really difficult that something we encountered, something I personally encountered, what was a challenge for me, and then what do we need to do differently? And so this, like, it's a riff on agile, which is what do we start, stop, continue for any given time box. But it's a great way for a team to reflect back, and then after the fact, it's like, hey, what were our desired outcomes? So was that really good? How could we say that's truly good, or was that just good enough? Or and
Yeah.
sometimes, especially when you're doing prototyping or signing letters of intent, maybe good enough is good enough, right? I mean, just as an example, when I worked for Perfect Day Foods, we were making a metric ton of protein, and the venture fund just said, "Prove to us that you can make 1 metric ton of functional protein by this date that we could sample and people could do things with." It didn't have to be the highest quality protein, the highest functioning protein. It just needed to be a functional protein that people could use and sample and try to make different products. It was a functional ingredient, and so sometimes good enough is good enough. And I worked for another company. This is actually one of the last companies I worked for. We had pulled a workforce in from a much larger corporation that had failed for a variety of reasons. And there was a mindset of how much everybody needed, 12 stage gates, all this process, all of this planning. And I was like, it's 26 people. We don't need, you don't need that. It's not, how is that going to help? What is good enough? What do you need? What's the need to have? What's the nice to have? And I think early on, that's a nice way to operate. And that's the beauty of a startup. And then later, right, as you're scaling the business, that process where process is helpful, including how the board and the leadership team are operating at that point. You are putting more process in place. You are thinking about strategically, talent density of the business. It's less opportunistic hires and more really thoughtful hires of like, where do we need to grow the business? What's going to help us? Getting great lieutenants in place so that leadership team can kind of focus on what's our next fundraising round? Who do we need to do
Yeah.
collaborations, partnerships, and all of that?
Yeah, when it's startup, you like all balls are in the air and initially, and you're juggling everything. And you've mentioned process a few times now, and I think process is, you can't have a culture without a system, and you can't have a system without a culture. And I think that the two go hand in hand, right? And you've probably seen this yourself. And I think there's a set period of time when you're scaling, growing, that you can have chaos, organized chaos, and then there comes a point where you can't allow for there to just be this chaos of a process going on, and you need to be way more strategic. At what point do you come in, or do you say to the founders or the businesses that you guys need to get your shit together, essentially? Like, there is no process, there is no system within here. You might have the best culture in the world. Like, when you're starting it, everything's like everyone's in it together sort of thing.
Yeah, it's like a family. So two great questions. So one of them I'll answer first, which is right. When you're hiring everybody, people come in and say, "Why do you want to be a startup?" For me, I must be a little crazy because I've been doing it for 25 years, and I do love the culture of a startup. But I wouldn't answer you that it's about the energy, because what it's actually about is risk tolerance, and so that you come in and you know that you're going to make pivots like crazy, and that you can navigate that, like your ability to self manage is high, right? And that risk tolerance is high, and that you're going to have, right, a lot of people coming and going, because that's the nature of a startup. Some people can handle the risk, some people can't, right? And you're having that decision making, you're going to put all your blood and guts into something, and then the market's going to tell you something very different, and so you're going to make a change. It can be really emotional and hard. So that's one thing, right? And so you like have this almost family relationship where the budget's no budget and the budget's like this crazy budget, and you've got all these players coming in and really understanding how to navigate that, right? How much effort and energy to keep a future collaborator warm versus spending a lot of time putting something together for something. So that's you get better and better at that, and it's like that's the advantage of having someone like me work with the business where it's like, "Hey, here's an opportunity to, like, keep these people lukewarm, but maybe we don't wanna do a crazy prototype or something
No.
for them, like, here's what that makes looks like." And then I think, where that happens typically is very much associated with funding rounds, right? And so as when you're pre-Series A, you can be more messy and, throw more spaghetti at the wall, think of different ideas, ways to approach things, and that's great, especially as you're playing with different customers and you're getting different customer insights. I think, you're getting good information, that's helpful, and it makes a lot of sense. And you get way more serious as you're moving towards Series A, and it's like that's where a board is great. Like that's the whole relationship, how a board serves and works with a founder is to say, here are the specific inflection points that we can tell you will enable us to write another check or go to my general partners in my venture fund. We are talking about how venture works. And go to convince my general partners of we have a parada here where we have first right of refusal on investing, and I feel so good about these people, because they're looking at their own portfolio. Like, what are the companies that are doing well that are, achieving, attracting talent and investment? And what are the companies that we need to double down on and who, like we still think can pull it off? And then how do you call that portfolio? And in a business, in startups, you're doing the same thing. It's
Yeah.
all portfolio management, right?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And then you go from startup to then an IPO, and it's another ball game altogether in
Yeah,
terms.
or not that, right? It's like, maybe it's not an IPO, maybe it's an acquisition, right?
Yeah, true.
Maybe it's and now, like, I do all this deep tech work at Berkeley, and there's all these lawyers in the room, and it's really like, this year I mean, I've always done this in my career, but it's like the number of times the lawyers will call out and say, that's a licensing opportunity. You could make a gold mine licensing that because what it would take to take something to market could be so intensive. And also like maybe the financing or the focus is not on that. Like in the US, a very different focus on energy, clean technology, green tech right now. Whereas in Europe and Oz, there's a lot of money going into foundational technologies, growing fermentation, alternative fuels, and clean tech. Europe is very focused on food security, AI sovereignty, the legislation around AI. And so people are very, very committed to putting effort and energy into that. So I mean, I work a month, a quarter there, and like that's why, because that's how much people are really doubling down on those efforts.
And that for me, does it, and Marion, you'll be able to share more on this. Like it's funny when when I have these podcast conversations, I go to ask a question and you just start talking about it. And that's why I love keeping it free flowing. You just talked around being in Europe and you're there a month, a quarter. And you were talking to me pre-show around AI and quantum computing and the energy grid and the impact it's having and, everything in that space. Everything that's happening in Europe right now, and yes, in Australia, there is a lot of focus on future proofing, if you like, future proofing what's next. How far off? Like, I mean, I guess I've got two questions here. Where in the world is leading? Do you think is leading this innovation and this tech? Is it Europe or is it Europe and Australia? And do you think that when we think about the future, how far off is this future? Do you think it's like a year away, or is it happening to us right now? And this is why we need to be proofing ourselves now. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Many people would disagree with me, but I think we're in it now. And for example, there's a fund in Oz called Regen Ventures, Tom McQuillan. I mean, they do an amazing job putting their funding, like really walking the walk. And so they've said like we're about the future, food security, clean air, water scarcity, and really thinking about these things. And so, I've seen some amazing investments that they've made, and I mean, I don't know the Oz landscape. I've traveled there. I love Australia, and I've been to Taz a couple times and love it. But I think there's and EU there's not gonna be more land, right? And they're right next to Russia, and they're right on the cusp of watching what's impacting air and travel with what's happening in the Gulf, and so there's a heightened sense of urgency, and so, I mean, they're definitely putting the effort in now. And having very public discussions about this, it's like and even legislating and pulling in, like, really listening to entrepreneurs and startups and the universities around, like, what's possible. I think about, there's, like, BII in, Copenhagen. They get all of the Novo Nordisk, that whole money from GLP-1 is a nonprofit, and it goes into, uh, doing good things for the country. Norsken, which came out of Sweden, same thing, like, they have a mission about taking all this money and doing good things for the future, and it's like, look, not everybody has that altruistic mission. It's still for profit, right? They want people that are gonna be successful in running their business, that can run a business that's going to have impact. How do you measure impact? That's a whole 'nother thing.
Yeah.
But which is a whole different discussion, but it is very real. It's like there's still gotta be a market for whatever you're doing, right? Or a speed to impact. What does that look like? And I think there definitely is a heightened sense of urgency in rest of world, whereas right now, and maybe this will change in a couple of years, right? In the US, I think there's a percentage of the population that is very aware of that, and then the current administration is not putting emphasis on clean air, clean water, energy technology, and whatnot. Now, what's happening with gas prices, interestingly enough, like, you could have an administration that doesn't support these technologies, and that now you've got gas prices going up so crazy and oil prices that it forces investment in alternative energies. So it's like,
And I
yeah,
just
funny.
it's a good it's a good segue actually because you've talked a lot about energy, you've talked a lot about power, and we've talked a lot about what's happening. The future is here now, and I could not agree with you more.
Yeah.
I feel like, and call me, a forever optimist. I do feel like the power is shifting. The power is shifting from a leadership, from a founder perspective, entrepreneur, in terms of everyone is fed up with the old world of this way of being and doing things that no longer serves what we need now. And so the power and doing good for society, for planet, for business in general is really for me shining through, and it's going to continue to shine through. And there'll always be these bad power people or whatever, or whatever. I just do think we're at a critical point now that the good power is going to shine a light.
I hope
And I know
so.
that might sound really naive. It might sound really naive, but it's people like yourself. It's people like myself. It's, savvy business people. They're like just saying, no, this is the focus. This is what we have to do now. And I think we need more of that in business,
Yeah.
more of that in the
Yeah.
world.
I think there's a lot of effort going towards doing good things and realizing that it's a limited time. But it always scares me, not just you, me, I do it too. Like, anytime somebody says everybody or they all, right? And it's like, well, some
Yeah,
people.
true,
So,
true.
but my old friend used to say, and I love this, like, because I've moved a lot in my life and lived all over the world, and she always used to say, "You have brothers and sisters everywhere," and I think that's true.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah,
Tell me a little bit about women and what you see in terms of women founders, women entrepreneurs, all of that. Yourself, like we were just talking pre-show, and this is not a bra burning exercise or anything like that.
yeah,
I have picked up on a pattern myself in terms of
yeah,
with all the various conversations I'm having on this podcast, and a lot of men are calling it out. From founders, CEOs, people in VC, that there is a real gap in terms of the stats are quite astounding when it comes to women founders in comparison to men, and also women seeking funding. You also focusing on FemTech, and you
I
called
do. Yeah. Yeah. Huge passion of mine.
yeah, and I guess I'm exploring FemTech because I do see a real opportunity in that space. It's very interesting, and it feels like it's becoming bigger. It's starting to get quite a
It is. Yeah,
groundswell
it's
in terms.
bigger than interesting. It's a
Yeah,
thing right now. It's really happening.
yeah,
There's quite a bit of funding moving towards female founders. This is a great time to be a female founder. I
yeah,
would if you've got an idea, this is the time. There's a lot of these venture ecosystems are specifically putting out call to actions for female founders or female co-founders, right? And many like I just came from an event down in Berkeley today where this robotics guy he's looking for a co-founder and he wants like anybody that's got great ideas in engineering and that would be a great place for someone to just go in and he could secure a certain type of funding because he's got to keep a female co-founder. So win-win, right?
yeah,
And so and also this digital health revolution I was at an event in Munich a couple months ago, and it was like all female founders talking about AI, FemTech. One lady had developed a early detection for endometriosis.
yeah,
Another group had developed a ring for PMS, and so you could track various things. And so it's Stanford has a whole school on digital health. The Nordic Innovation House here is like hooked up with. So the Nordics are huge on this innovation ideation, but like that's not the biggest market. So how do you take those things and bring it into rest of world market? And that right, it's a different you and I were talking about this earlier, like often the cultural norm of how you do business wherever you live, Australia included, right? It is very different than when you're coming into the US market and how you want to pitch something
100%.
or and I do think it's intriguing right now that where in the past maybe it was very fast and very hard and that there's an appetite right now for like slow your roll.
Yeah,
Walk me through what's going on. Why you? Why this? Tell me the problem it's gonna solve and walk me through, what your mode is, how you're gonna protect yourself, and why you? Why would we invest in you? And there is more of that going on right now, and I think that's
yeah.
pretty exciting.
And it's really interesting. It's funny. The other day, I had someone on my podcast, haven't pushed it live yet, and he was asking me. He asked to talk to me after the show, and I was asking quite a few questions just around, and I'd been to an event myself, and of 840 people, I think I was 10% of women. There was a minority of entrepreneurs, business owners, and he was asking me afterwards. He's just like really probing me on, what do I think about women and as co-founders with, with men in business and the need for it? And I'm like, absolutely, there's a need for it. I think that there's a role men play, there's a role women play, and you put the two together, comes right back to this alignment piece as well. And I think that the dance of both, like, this is a different form of energy, but it's an energy that I think businesses require, and I think it'll be a great opportunity to see more of it. And for me, the FemTech piece is super interesting because, again, it feels like more and more women are not prepared to put up with what they've had to put up with in the past. Like if you go back to endometriosis or perimenopause, it's not fun times. Like there's a lot of things that we've just been told that this is just it. This is just you as a female. And so coming back to solving a
Solving
fundamental
a problem. Solve
problem
it right?
is what
Yeah, solving a
exactly what
problem.
you're talking
Yeah.
about because and there's a ton of, female problems that we don't haven't spoken
Yeah.
about in the past where it's just like, I can't, I'm not putting up with this anymore. I need to solve this. And so I think that
51% of the population and 51% of the population that spends money. And you and I were joking about this earlier. Like the budget is no budget for people and their kids, people and their pets, and trying to solve a problem that is really vexing, right?
yeah,
What's your budget? You tell me you can solve it. Like, let's talk about it, right?
totally. I've got two final questions for
Yeah,
you. I know you have got
sure.
an action-packed week. If you could look into a crystal ball right now, this is a bit of a wild question. I'm going to throw it at you though and see what you come back with. And you might go, B, I can't answer that. What do you see the world looking like at the end of this year when it comes to business?
That's a big question. When it comes to well, can you be a little bit more specific than when it comes to business? My business, your business, business over the business. economy? What do you
I guess from an innovation perspective, let's put it into innovation in terms of, from a FemTech, climate tech, clean tech perspective. Like what sort of
it's yeah,
yeah.
to me, first of all, there's tremendous investment going into these sectors right now, and so where the money goes, big breakthroughs will happen, and so I think a lot of work has been done on this already, and now it's just unleashing that, and so I'm very optimistic about these sectors for sure, and so even in terms of business, regardless of what's happening in the world, these problems aren't going away, and they're very solvable.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
then
so optimistic.
yeah, I love that. I love that you're optimistic. And then last but not least, founder and I are really having a really shitty, hard day. And they're just like hands are in the air. Yeah, they've got this. They're sitting on almost like they're so close to solving the problem in terms of what their mission or the impact they're wanting to make. And yet it still feels like they've got to climb Mount Everest in terms of how much longer they've got to go. What sort of advice or mentoring do you give those type of founders when they're having those days?
I always connect people to the mission. I really believe in mission, vision, values. So I always connect people to the mission. Like, why are you doing this? Why is it important? What's the moonshot? And also, like, what's one thing we can do that we can execute really well on? It can't be a lot of things. And then let's do that. Let me help you make that happen. Let's get the right people in place, the right level of talent, the right crew, and also like are we trying to have things last longer, right? Are we trying to extend the ramp or are we trying to accelerate? If once you pick one of those 2, you know what to do.
That's a really good point because we get so
Yeah,
overwhelmed at time. And what keeps coming up for me with this conversation I've had with you is subtract, subtract, subtract at what's not
100%.
serving you. I'm a massive believer in
100%.
subtractive psychology. Like less, like when it comes to a problem, let's not add to it. Let's subtract to get to exactly what next move we need to make. Mary,
Everybody hears that a different way. You can't say it the same way to any one person.
you can't actually. You have to. It's different tactics. I love it, Marian. Thank you so
Yep.
much for your time. How do
Okay.
we find out more about you? Where do we go?
LinkedIn, Marian Barber. I don't have a website and, reach out and I'm happy to have a conversation.
I love it. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you. This is
Marian.
super fun.
Have a great week ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.